Hey everyone, today's species spotlight is on one of, if not the most unique and interesting species of snake on the planet. Today we are of course talking about the tentacled snakes. Now, real quick, big shout out and thanks to my guy at 310 Exotics. He's the one that supplied all of the footage of today's video of the species spotlight of the tentacled snakes. He has an absolutely amazing and really cool diverse collection of rare oddball species like myself, although obviously he has even other ones that I don't even hope to be dreaming of. He also supplied a lot of the video footage for the Chinese crocodile lizard video. So if you want to, after this one, check out all the other species spotlights, including that one. Absolutely go check it out. I'll be sure to put a link for his stuff down below in the description of this video. Absolutely go check him out. He does really cool stuff, has some amazing animals. Thank you again, 310 Exotics, and of course we will be doing more stuff together in the future. So, back to the tentacled snakes. These guys originate from places of Southeastern Asia, basically countries like Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. They're a relatively small snake, only getting to about 2 to 3 feet in length and fairly thin-bodied, and of course their name is pretty obvious, the tentacled snake of those two little wonky appendages. They're the only species in their genus, and they are masters of camouflage. These guys essentially come in two pattern morphs, either blotched or splotched, and then striped. Kind of how like the gargoyle geckos, because we're probably more familiar with them. They have the two different pattern morphs and then the varying colors, the striped and then the blotched. Only with the tentacled snakes, essentially they do kind of varying colors of grays to browns to a little bit of black. They essentially kind of look like sunken fallen tree branches, and that's exactly what their camouflage is for. These guys inhabit usually fairly murky, dark waters of slow-moving streams, rivers, estuaries, and ponds. Then they are meant to entirely hide from both predators and prey. They spend their entire lives underwater looking like fallen logs, and a lot of the time they were observed hanging out in very odd particular positions that we'll talk about in just a second, with their tails kind of wrapped around or anchoring them in place. So they just sit there and they look exactly like essentially sunken detritus in there. Now, let's get back to those little tentacled things, right? Because obviously we want to talk about them. The fact is that scientists actually know a lot more and have a pretty good idea of what these tentacles are for, these little appendages, than any of the other more well-known species of snakes with rhinoplasties, like the leaf-nosed snake and the rhino rat snakes. When you actually look really up close and they take x-rays and look under the microscope and all that little in-depth stuff, you can actually see that there are lots of nerve clusters and nerve endings in those appendages that hang off that look like little tentacles. So scientists can fairly safely assume, we got there, that these guys essentially act as extrasensory organs. And that makes complete and total sense when you look at their hunting behavior. So remember I said that they're often found in kind of weird positions? Not always, but a lot of the time, these tentacled snakes are often seen in kind of a weird arcing position where they will sit there and they'll take their neck and their heads and they'll tilt it over to look like a little candy cane or a reverse J. And that's the position that they will hold themselves in. These guys seem to essentially only predate on species of fish. And what happens a lot of times is fish, they will come in and they will go in between essentially the little loop of their head and neck and their body. And then in a matter of microseconds, they will jerk their body upwards towards the fish, causing the fish to freak out because they have very high reaction speed with all of their extrasensory organs and their lateral line and all of that. And they will fish out and they will position their body in very odd contorted ways. They will call it like the C start or the C spot because they kind of contort their body into like a C shape to try to get away from whatever threat it is. And in that literal of microseconds, milliseconds, whichever one is smaller, the snake will grab and envenomate that fish. And so to be able to do that with such accuracy and then reflexes and all of that involved in such dark, murky, usually black water conditions, those extrasensory organs make absolute sense for them to be able to do that. Really cool. Now, if you want to keep these guys as pets, there are quite a few things that you need to keep in mind. Number one, as I just mentioned, that they are rear-fanged venomous. There is no that I could find ever recording of a hospitalization or a medically significant bite, or even really a bite from these guys. And these are kept in zoos all across the world and in private collections in more than just the United States. I can't find a single thing about them because honestly, pretty unwilling to bite. They'll just try to move away from you underwater. So if you live in an area where you can't keep venomous snakes or rear-fanged venomous snakes, Colorado, are classified as such, you can't keep them. So that's why we have to go reach out to the great people like 310 Exotics, right? And then if you do, again, want to keep any sort of aquatic or semi-aquatic species, the biggest thing you have to remember, regardless of what it is a very secure, tight-fitting lid. When I used to keep aquarium fish before I even moved into reptiles when I was a teenager and then into a young adulthood, that's what I mostly kept. And anything that was shaped like a snake wanted to escape. Eels, ropefish, bikers, all of that, and the same applies for these aquatic reptiles. So you want to have a tight-fitting lid. Now, when we get into the actual size and everything in the aquarium, you want to make sure that it's large enough for the animal to completely stretch out both vertically, because again, they like to sit like this, so something that's fairly deep and something that is fairly wide. So top to bottom, left to right, front to back. That's something that they'll be able to fit that 2 to 3 foot long snake in its entirety. And then, again, as we've mentioned earlier in the video, is that they like to anchor and hold themselves onto things and to blend in. That camouflage is a big part of their natural behavior. So you want to have large sunken stones, logs, and probably some fake plants, or heck, even live plants in there for them to feel comfortable and for them to be able to grab on and anchor themselves in place. And then substrate is kind of whatever may have you, but the biggest thing about the water for this is two things. Is that number one, it needs to be very, very clean water, excellent filtration. If they're living in water all the time, that means they're eating and defecating and using and then producing urates and urine in that water. So it can get very dirty very quickly. So lots of filtration, as well as they need relatively acidic water. Typically what is recommended is 5.5 to 6.0 pH. For those unfamiliar with the pH scale, 7 is neutral, lower is acidic, higher is alkali. So for like the fish people, discus, angelfish, that's 7, that's fairly neutral. Alkali, those are those African cichlids from Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, and then the acidic, that's where we end up keeping a lot of these type of herpetiles like, in fact, Surinautobes, and then obviously tentacled snakes. And in fact, a lot of times you actually require very specific aquarium buffers or chemicals to create that kind of consistent black water, and that's even how they're marketed now, chemicals to keep them at that perfect pH, as well as they do, in fact, need a little bit of heat to them as well. To give them an area for kind of hauling out or basking, it's not a bad idea. However, in multiple articles that I read and the 3 people that I know that keep them, they've never once, ever, including a zookeeper, ever seen them getting out of the water. But it's always good there to have it. If you have a heater for your aquarium, you don't really need a heat bulb, but something like a halogen or a low wattage UVA, UVB bulb, for instance, like a VivTech, SureSun, or something like that would be really good for them because it can penetrate into the water a little bit. And oftentimes you'll see them near the surface because they only hold their breath for 15 to 20, sometimes upwards of 30 minutes. And so you'll see them kind of come up and get breath and then go back down. So they're usually near the surface and they can get a little bit of that light as well. For actually keeping them, obviously they are fish eaters, so you want to avoid things like rosy minnow, rosy reds, and things like and goldfish. Those are high in the thiaminase, and that will slowly kill your animal, and we don't want that. So finding a steady supply of eventually maybe like frozen silver sides or killifish or guppies that aren't high in thiaminase and a much better staple diet for them is also a necessity, so it's something you want to keep in mind, as well as they're mostly imports, although they are known to produce in captivity, and I have seen several people list their captive-born animals for sale here in the States on occasion, but very few and far between. You really have to kind of go to like these more well-known or higher trafficked reptile shows, or kind of know a guy, or maybe even if you're lucky on the old fauna classifieds, you might see someone list one there. They're very, very cool. The odd thing about these guys is that in addition to, having them being able to reproduce in captivity, they're actually ovoviviparous. similar to that of garter snake. So essentially the female will grow the eggs inside, the babies will hatch, and then live birth. But while that is very odd, but not unheard of, again, garter snakes and things like that, they actually seem to do better in small groups of 3, 4, 5 individuals. And every single person I know that has kept them have kept them in groups, including obviously 310 exotics or 310 reptiles, excuse me, collection as well. They seem to just kind of do better in groups. And even in the wild, they're typically seen relatively in close proximity. Obviously not stuck together because we're keeping them in boxes, but whatever may have you. Really, really cool species of snake. If you live in an area that you can have one, honestly, I think that this is something that would be a much better viable option than, say, like the elephant trunk snakes. Number one, they stay much, much smaller. Number two, they're not as likely to get out. And number three, honestly, I think they're just a much more interesting looking species. I remember the very first time I saw them, it was when I think I was like 15 or 16 at the Denver Zoo when they very first got them in for the first time. And it was really, really cool to see those guys. So if you ever get a chance to, go check them out at a zoo or reptile show, or if you are able to keep them legally and properly, I highly recommend it. Again, thanks to 310. Go check out their stuff. Again, link down below as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Please check out the whole species spotlight playlist. I have over 70 different videos of all sorts of different reptiles and amphibians listed in there. So go check that out. It helps my click-through rate, lets YouTube know that I exist and all that jazz. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Thank you all so much. Hope you're having a great day, and we will check you next time.